Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 6 deeply disturbing true Halloween horror stories that will make anyone reconsider what October 31st truly awakens. These are not campfire tales or internet creepypasta, but documented encounters with forces that emerge when the veil between worlds grows thin. Each account has been meticulously compiled from police reports, witness testimonies, historical records, and first-hand survivor statements. From cursed Victorian costumes that possess their wearers to secret rural cults performing harvest rituals. From radio broadcasts originating from impossible frequencies to children who vanish into houses that should not exist. These stories reveal that Halloween horror extends far beyond plastic masks and fake blood. The evidence speaks for itself, and what happened to these 6 individuals cannot be explained by coincidence or imagination. If you appreciate thoroughly researched horror content that exposes the darkness lurking behind our most celebrated holiday, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the unexplained. After listening to these chilling accounts, share your own Halloween encounters in the comments below. We read every response, and some of your stories may be featured in future episodes. Now turn off the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself as we uncover the 6 most disturbing true Halloween horror stories ever documented. Patricia had been collecting vintage Halloween decorations for close to 15 years. Not the mass-produced plastic stuff from big box stores, but the real deal from estate sales, antique shops, and online auctions. Her basement was filled with papier-mâché jack-o'-lanterns from the 1920s, tin noisemakers, crepe paper garlands, and German die-cut decorations that most people had never even heard of. She could identify the era of a Halloween postcard just by the printing style. She knew which manufacturers produced the most sought-after celluloid pieces, and she had connections with other collectors across the country who would alert her when something special hit the market. Her husband thought the hobby was eccentric but harmless. Her friends admired her curated displays every October, and Patricia herself felt a deep satisfaction in preserving pieces of history that would otherwise crumble in forgotten attics or end up in landfills. It was mid-September when Patricia walked into an estate sale in a town she had never visited before, about 40 minutes from her home. The house itself looked like it had not been updated since the 1960s, and when she asked the estate coordinator about Halloween items, the woman led her down into a basement that smelled of mildew and old cardboard. The concrete walls were lined with metal shelving units packed with boxes, and the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows across everything. Patricia began sorting through boxes methodically, finding the usual assortment of modern decorations mixed with a few interesting pieces from the 1950s. And then the coordinator said something that made Patricia's pulse quicken. There was one more item, hanging in the back corner near the furnace. When Patricia saw the costume, she stopped breathing for a moment. It was hanging from a rusted pipe, and even in the dim light, she could see it was extraordinary. The fabric was aged silk, hand-stitched with seams so fine they must have been sewn by someone with incredible skill. The color pattern consisted of faded red and black diamonds, the classic Harlequin design, but the dye had aged into shades that no modern manufacturer could replicate. The pants and shirt were one piece, a full bodysuit that looked like it would fit someone around 5 feet 8 inches tall. Attached to the costume was a separate collar with 3 small bells, tarnished but intact. But it was the mask that truly captured Patricia's attention. The mask was porcelain, not plastic or rubber or papier-mâché, but actual glazed porcelain. It was cracked along the left side, a fracture that ran from the temple down to the jaw. but the damage only added to its character. The face was painted in the style of a classical clown, white base with exaggerated red lips and black diamonds around the eyes. But something about the expression was wrong. The smile was too wide, stretching almost to where the ears would be. The eyes were asymmetrical, one slightly higher than the other, giving the face a look of perpetual confusion or perhaps malice. And the eye holes were oddly placed, not quite where a person's actual eyes would align, as if the mask had been designed for someone whose face was not quite human in proportion. Patricia asked the coordinator about the costume's history. The woman shrugged and said the previous owner had no family, had lived alone in this house for decades, and had died 3 months ago at the age of 87. Most of his possessions were junk, she explained. But she had been instructed to sell everything. When Patricia asked how much for the costume, the coordinator barely glanced at it before saying $40. Patricia tried not to show her excitement. A costume of this age and quality, particularly with a porcelain mask, should have been worth at least $500 to the right collector. She paid in cash immediately. As Patricia carried the costume up the basement stairs, she felt an odd sensation, like the air pressure had changed. The estate coordinator watched her leave with an expression that Patricia could not quite read. Relief, perhaps, or maybe concern. Patricia loaded the costume carefully into her car, laying it across the back seat, and started the drive home. 3 times during that drive, she glanced in her rearview mirror and felt certain the costume had shifted position. But that was impossible. She had laid it flat. There was no way it could have moved on its own. At home, Patricia brought the costume down to her collection room, a finished section of the basement where she kept her most valuable pieces in a climate-controlled environment. She had a dressmaker's mannequin in the corner, and she carefully dressed it in the costume. The fabric slid over the mannequin easily, almost too easily, as if the costume wanted to be worn. Patricia adjusted the collar, positioned the mask, and stepped back to admire her acquisition. Even on the lifeless mannequin, the costume had a presence. It dominated the room. Patricia's husband came down to see what she had found, took one look at the costumed figure, and went pale. He told her it gave him the creeps. He told her there was something wrong with it. He told her she should get rid of it. Patricia laughed and accused him of being superstitious. But after he left, she stood alone in the collection room and felt, for just a moment, like the mask was watching her. She dismissed the feeling and went upstairs. Over the next 2 weeks, small things happened. Patricia would arrange the costume in a certain position, with the arms at specific angles, and return later to find the arms had moved. She would adjust the tilt of the mask, centering it on the mannequin's head, and come back to find it rotated slightly to the left, as if the figure were looking toward the door. The room temperature, which Patricia carefully monitored to protect her collection, would drop by 5 or 6 degrees whenever she spent time near the costume. Her cat, who normally loved exploring the basement, refused to enter the collection room. The animal would sit at the doorway, fur raised, hissing at something Patricia could not see. Patricia rationalized each incident. The house settled, causing vibrations that shifted the mannequin. The temperature fluctuation was probably a problem with the HVAC system. The cat was reacting to some smell in the old fabric. But the rationalizations became harder to maintain when Patricia started having dreams. In the dreams, she was watching herself sleep. But the perspective was wrong. She was viewing her own sleeping form from across the room, from about 6 feet off the ground, and she could not move. She could only watch. And in these dreams, she heard a voice, thin and reedy, like wind through a crack, whispering in a language she did not recognize. Halloween was approaching, and Patricia's friend was hosting an adult costume party with a vintage horror theme. Patricia immediately thought of the clown costume. It would be perfect. It would be the most authentic piece at the party, and she relished the thought of explaining its history to other guests. When she mentioned the idea to her husband, he objected immediately. He told her there was something wrong with that thing. He told her he was serious, that she should not wear it. Patricia felt a flash of irritation. She had paid for the costume. She had every right to wear it. And besides, it was just fabric and porcelain. There was nothing to be afraid of. On Halloween night, Patricia laid the costume out on her bed. Up close, she noticed details she had missed before. There were stains on the gloves, old stains that had faded to a brownish yellow. The fingertips were especially stained, and when Patricia looked closer, she realized the leather had been worn thin in those spots, as if whoever had worn the costume had clawed at something repeatedly. She pushed the thought away and began to undress. The moment Patricia pulled the costume on, something felt different. The fabric was cold against her skin despite the heated house. It fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her body, which should have been impossible given that it was at least a century old and made for someone else. When she zipped up the back, she felt the material constrict slightly, hugging her form. She pulled on the gloves, and they sealed around her wrists tightly. Finally, she lifted the porcelain mask and positioned it over her face. The mask should not have fit. The eye holes were in the wrong place. But as Patricia held it against her face, the porcelain seemed to warm and soften, conforming to her features. She felt the inside of the mask pressing against her skin, and for a moment, she could not breathe. Then the sensation passed, and when she opened her eyes, she could see perfectly through the misaligned eye holes. She walked to the full-length mirror in her bedroom. For just a second, maybe less, she saw someone else staring back. Not a reflection wearing a costume, but someone else entirely. An older man with hollow eyes and a smile that was not a smile at all. His face was gaunt, his skin the color of old paper, and he was looking at her with an expression of recognition. Then Patricia blinked, and it was just her reflection again, dressed in the costume. Her husband appeared in the doorway and stopped dead. He went pale. He told her that her eyes looked wrong. Patricia turned to face him and asked what he meant. He stammered something about the light, about the angle. But he would not make eye contact with her. He told her one more time that she should not wear the costume. Patricia felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sudden. She heard herself tell him to stop being ridiculous, but the voice that came from behind the mask sounded not quite like hers. It was her voice, but flatter, colder. Her husband left the room without another word. Patricia grabbed her car keys and drove to the party. During the drive, she felt strange. Her hands on the steering wheel looked wrong, the gloved fingers too long, the angle of her wrists unusual. She caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror and saw the mask staring back. That too wide smile, those asymmetrical eyes. And for a moment, she felt like she was not driving. Like she was a passenger in her own body, watching someone else control her movements. At the party, Patricia's friends gathered around to admire her costume. They complimented the craftsmanship, the authenticity, the attention to detail. But Patricia noticed that no one stood too close to her. No one touched the costume, even when she offered to let them feel the fabric. And several people commented that the costume was too realistic, that it was honestly creeping them out. Patricia heard herself laughing. But the sound was wrong. Too high-pitched, lasting too long. She found herself standing in corners, motionless, watching the other guests. She did not remember walking to these spots. She would suddenly become aware that she had been standing perfectly still for several minutes, staring at someone across the room. One friend asked if she was doing method acting, staying in character as a creepy clown. Patricia did not remember deciding to do that. The party host had 2 children, a boy and a girl, ages 7 and 9. They were supposed to be in bed, but they had snuck out to watch the adults from the top of the stairs. Patricia became aware of them watching her. She turned her head, and the children's eyes went wide. Then Patricia found herself walking toward the staircase. She did not decide to walk. Her legs simply moved. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the children, and she could not move or speak. She was trapped inside her own body, watching through the mask's eye holes, as something else controlled her. The children's mother called Patricia's name 3 times before Patricia could respond. When she finally turned around, the host went pale. Later, the host would tell other guests that it was like Patricia was not in there anymore. That whoever was looking through that mask, it was not her friend. Another guest, a man dressed as a vampire, made a joke about clowns being scarier than vampires. Patricia's head snapped toward him, the movement too fast, the angle wrong. Several people gasped. Patricia felt her body moving toward the man, but she could not stop it. She could not scream or call for help. She was watching from somewhere deep inside her own head as her gloved hands reached for the man's throat. The hands closed around his neck, squeezing. The man's eyes bulged. He clawed at Patricia's wrists, but the grip did not loosen. It took 4 people to pull her off him. They dragged her back, and Patricia felt her body thrashing with a strength that was not hers. The man collapsed, gasping, and when he looked up, there were bruises forming on his neck, dark purple marks in the shape of handprints. But when the host took a photo to document the assault, they noticed something disturbing. The finger proportions in the bruises were wrong. Too long, too thin, not matching Patricia's hands at all. During the attack, Patricia had been speaking. The other guests heard her voice, but the words were not English. One guest, who taught linguistics at the local college, later said the language sounded like corrupted Latin, mixed with something older. And several guests reported hearing Patricia say things in voices that were not hers. One woman swore she heard Patricia speak in her dead mother's voice, using a pet name that no one else could have known. Inside the mask, Patricia was screaming. She could see everything happening. She could feel her hands squeezing the man's throat, but she could not stop. And worse, she could hear a voice whispering instructions to her body. The voice came from the mask itself, vibrating against her skull. It was telling her body where to squeeze, how much pressure to apply, when to twist. The voice was delighted. It had not touched living flesh in so very long. Patricia's husband arrived 20 minutes later, after receiving frantic calls from the host. He found Patricia collapsed on the living room floor, twitching, the costume still on. Other guests had backed away from her, forming a wide circle. Patricia's husband knelt beside her and tried to remove the mask. It would not come off. His fingers could not find a seam or edge. The porcelain had sealed itself to Patricia's face, the inside somehow fused to her skin. He had to physically pry it off, wedging his fingers under the edge and pulling with all his strength. Patricia screamed as the mask came away, and the sound was not one voice, but 2, overlapping. When the mask finally tore free, Patricia vomited and collapsed. She woke up in her husband's car, being driven home. She had no memory of the last hour. Her husband told her what she had done, and Patricia began to cry. When they got home and she looked in the mirror, she saw that the skin on her face, everywhere the mask had touched, was covered in raised welts. Red and angry, the welts formed patterns. Her husband took photos, and when they showed them to a friend who studied history, the friend identified the patterns as names and dates. Names in Old German script, dates from the 1890s. The costume was still at the party, collapsed in a heap where it had fallen when Patricia's husband removed the mask. The host called the next day and said something disturbing had happened. After everyone left and she was cleaning up, she had seen the costume move. Not a lot. Just a slight shifting, like something crawling out of the fabric from the inside. Patricia became obsessed with learning the costume's history. She contacted the estate sale coordinator and got the address of the property. She researched the previous owner, a recluse named Harold Wickham, who had died alone at 87. But property records showed that the house had been in the Wickham family for over a century. The original owner was Thomas Wickham, who had purchased the property in 1891. Patricia found a reference to Thomas Wickham in a local historical society archive. He had been a traveling circus performer, specifically a clown, known for an act that disturbed audiences even in that era. Newspaper clippings from 1893 described Wickham's performances. He would enter the stage in his costume and mask, and over the course of the act, his personality would completely change. He would become violent, aggressive, attacking members of the audience. Several people were seriously injured at his shows. After one performance, a child died under mysterious circumstances. The child had volunteered to join Wickham on stage, and during the act, the child collapsed. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but witnesses claimed Wickham had touched the child's face, and the child had simply stopped breathing. Thomas Wickham disappeared after that final show. No records existed of his death or burial, but the costume remained. It passed through the Wickham family for generations, and Patricia found records of 3 other deaths connected to it, all on Halloween, all involving people who had worn the costume. Patricia and her husband tried to destroy it. They attempted to burn the costume in their backyard fire pit. Patricia doused it with lighter fluid and dropped a match on it. The fabric would not ignite. The flame touched the costume and simply went out. They tried cutting the costume apart with scissors. The blades would not penetrate the fabric. Patricia's husband used a heavy knife. The blade snapped. He took the costume to his workplace, where he had access to an industrial shredder. He fed the costume into the machine. The shredder jammed, sparked, and shut down. When he pulled the costume out, it was intact, not even a loose thread. They decided to bury it. They drove to a remote section of forest, dug a hole 6 feet deep, and dropped the costume in. They filled the hole, packed the dirt, covered it with leaves, and drove away. 3 days later, Patricia went into her garage to get gardening supplies. The costume was hanging from a rafter, the mask turned toward the door, as if it had been waiting for her. Patricia filed a police report, claiming someone had broken into their property and left the costume as a threat. The police found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the yard, no disturbance of the soil where Patricia claimed she had buried it. They dismissed it as a prank or a mistake, suggesting that Patricia had never actually buried the costume and was misremembering due to stress. Now, the costume sits locked in a fireproof safe in a climate-controlled storage unit 20 miles from Patricia's home. She pays for the unit monthly. She has not opened the safe since the day she put the costume inside. But Patricia still has nightmares. In the dreams, she sees through the mask's eyes. She watches herself sleeping. She watches her husband sleeping. She watches her children sleeping. And the view is from inside her house, moving from room to room, even though the costume is locked in a safe 20 miles away. The scars on Patricia's face have faded, but never completely disappeared. Thin white lines form a pattern that dermatologists cannot explain. The pattern shifts slightly over time, the lines rearranging themselves into different configurations. On Halloween nights, the scars burn. And on Halloween nights, Patricia sees him in mirrors. Thomas Wickham, standing behind her, still wearing that smile, still wearing that costume, waiting. Patricia knows that one day, he will want the costume back. One day, he will want her to put it on again. And the most terrifying part, the part that keeps her awake more than anything else, is that some small piece of Patricia, some dark corner that the costume awakened, wants to wear it again too. She remembers the feeling of not being in control. She remembers the strength that flowed through her body. She remembers the voice whispering instructions, and in her weakest moments, she misses it. Detective James had worked missing persons for the county sheriff's department for 12 years, and Halloween was always the worst night of the year for calls. Parents panicked when kids were 5 minutes late, teenagers ran off to parties without telling anyone, and the sheer number of people in costumes made finding anyone nearly impossible. Most calls resolved within an hour. A child had wandered to a friend's house. A teenager had turned off their phone. By midnight, the panic subsided and families reunited. But the call that came in at 9:47 p.m. on October 31st was different. The mother's voice on the recording was not panicked. It was hollow. She kept repeating the same thing over and over. The house took her. The house on Blackwood Lane took my daughter. James arrived at the scene within 15 minutes. Blackwood Lane was a quiet cul-de-sac in one of the older neighborhoods, where houses sat on large lots with mature trees. The missing child was Emma Patterson, age 8, last seen trick-or-treating with her older brother Ryan, age 12. According to Ryan's statement, they had been working their way down the street together. Emma had run ahead to the last house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Ryan had stopped to adjust his costume. When he looked up, maybe 10 seconds later, Emma was gone. He had called her name, checked the yard, knocked on the door of the house she had been approaching. No one answered. No one had seen her. James walked the route Ryan described, measuring distances, checking sight lines. The house at the end of Blackwood Lane was a Victorian structure, well maintained, painted a dark blue that looked almost black in the streetlights. The Halloween decorations were elaborate. Fake cobwebs covered the porch. Animatronic figures moved in the windows. A fog machine created a low mist across the front lawn. But something about the display felt wrong to James. It was not scary in a fun way. It looked more like a monument to something. Like whoever had decorated was not celebrating Halloween, but worshiping it. The porch light was on. Through the front window, James could see a bowl of full-size candy bars sitting on a table. Someone was home. James knocked. A man in his late 60s opened the door almost immediately, as if he had been waiting. He introduced himself as Robert Marsh. He was cooperative, almost aggressively helpful. He invited James inside before James even asked. He offered to let officers search the entire property. He seemed calm in a way that struck James as odd. A child had vanished from in front of his house, and Robert Marsh acted like he had been expecting this exact situation. James and 2 other officers searched the house from top to bottom. The first floor was neat and orderly. Furniture from the 1970s, clean but outdated. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, all empty of people. The basement was finished, with wood paneling and old carpeting. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of a child, no signs of a struggle. The backyard was clear. The detached garage contained only a car and garden tools. Emma Patterson was not on the property. Robert Marsh's alibi was airtight. He had been on his front porch handing out candy from 6 o'clock until James arrived. He had a witness log, an actual notebook where he had been recording how many trick-or-treaters came by and what time. Dozens of parents and children had seen him. He had not left his porch for more than a minute or 2 at a time, just long enough to refill the candy bowl. There was no window of opportunity for him to have taken Emma. But something about the man made James's skin crawl. Not evidence, instinct. The way Marsh kept smiling while they searched for a missing child. The way his eyes followed James like he knew something James did not. James returned to the station and began running standard database searches on the address. What came back made his blood run cold. The system flagged Blackwood Lane for 3 previous missing children reports spanning 30 years. In 1995, a 7-year-old boy named Christopher Dunn vanished 3 houses down from Marsh's property. In 2003, a 9-year-old girl named Sophie Chen disappeared from a yard across the street. In 2011, an 8-year-old boy named Marcus Webb was last seen on the same block. All 3 disappearances occurred on Halloween night. None of the children were ever found. All 3 cases remained open and unsolved. James pulled the case files and spread them across his desk. The similarities were striking. All 3 children had been with siblings or friends when they vanished. All 3 disappeared in a matter of seconds when their companion looked away. All 3 were described by parents as trusting, friendly children who would approach strangers without fear. And all 3 vanished within a 200-yard radius of Robert Marsh's house. James checked property records. Robert Marsh had purchased the house in 1988. He had been living there during all 4 disappearances, including Emma's. James returned to Marsh's house the next day with his partner, Detective Sarah Chen. They asked Marsh about the previous cases. Marsh admitted he remembered them. Terrible tragedies, he said. He had almost moved because of the memories. But the house was his home. He had every right to stay. When James pointed out the pattern, 4 children in 32 years, all on Halloween, all within sight of his house, Marsh's expression did not change. He said it was a coincidence. The neighborhood had a lot of children. Statistically, more incidents would occur in areas with higher child populations. James asked where Marsh had been during each previous disappearance. Marsh smiled. "Right here," he said, handing out candy. Just like last night. Dozens of witnesses every time. James could check, and James did check. For each Halloween when a child vanished, neighbors confirmed seeing Robert Marsh on his front porch for hours, never leaving, always visible. The man had a perfect alibi for every single incident. James could not let it go. His lieutenant warned him about becoming obsessed, but James pulled all 4 cold case files and took them home. He studied them late into the night while his wife slept. He created timelines, mapped locations, analyzed patterns. He contacted the original investigators on the older cases. 2 were retired. 1 was dead. The retired detectives both said the same thing. They had suspected Marsh but could never prove anything. There was no evidence, no probable cause. No judge would sign a search warrant based solely on proximity. James began driving past Marsh's house during off-duty hours. He parked down the street and watched. Marsh had odd habits. He gardened at night, working under floodlights in his backyard. He received no visitors. Delivery trucks would arrive, and Marsh would insist on unloading items himself, never allowing workers into his property. James noticed that the house had unusually extensive ventilation for a structure built in 1920. There were vents and exhaust fans that seemed out of place on a Victorian home. James requested building permits for the property. The records showed that Marsh had made extensive basement renovations in 1994, the year before Christopher Dunn disappeared. Marsh had sealed off a section of the original foundation and built new concrete walls. The work had been done without permits, before the county required them for that type of renovation. There was no violation and no grounds for an inspection. 3 weeks after Emma's disappearance, James received a call from an elderly woman who refused to give her name. She would only agree to meet in person at a coffee shop in the next town over. When James arrived, he found a woman in her 80s, frail but sharp-eyed. She told him she lived in the house adjacent to Robert Marsh. She had been his neighbor for 40 years, and she had seen things. The woman explained that she kept journals, detailed notes about her daily observations. It was a habit from her career as a librarian. She had noticed strange lights from Marsh's basement windows at night, always on Halloween. She had heard sounds that did not make sense, like children laughing or crying, but muffled, as if coming from underground. And she claimed she had seen children in Marsh's house after they supposedly disappeared. James asked for specifics. The woman opened one of her journals to an entry dated November 2nd, 1995. She had written about seeing movement in Marsh's basement window the night after Christopher Dunn vanished. A small shadow, child-sized, moving past the glass. In 2003, she noted hearing what sounded like a young girl calling for help, voice faint, coming from the direction of Marsh's property. She had called police in 1995 to report her observations. An officer had come, talked to Marsh, and then told the woman that Marsh said she was senile. The officer believed Marsh. The woman was afraid if she pushed further, something would happen to her too. James knew he could not use the testimony. It was circumstantial at best, the observations of an elderly woman with no physical evidence. But it confirmed his instincts. Robert Marsh was responsible. James was certain. The problem was proving it. As the next Halloween approached, James made a decision that would end his career if discovered. He asked his sister if he could take his 9-year-old nephew trick-or-treating. The boy, named Tyler, resembled the missing children. Brown hair, small for his age, trusting face. James outfitted Tyler with a hidden camera in his costume and a small microphone. He positioned himself in an unmarked car with a clear view of Marsh's house. His plan was to send Tyler to Marsh's door while recording everything, hoping Marsh would say or do something incriminating. On Halloween night, James watched as Tyler approached Marsh's porch. Marsh opened the door with his usual smile. He complimented Tyler's costume. He dropped a full-size candy bar into Tyler's bag. They had a brief, pleasant conversation about the weather and how many trick-or-treaters had come by. Then Tyler thanked him and walked away. Nothing happened. Tyler returned to James's car safely. The recording showed nothing but a friendly old man handing out candy. James's partner found out about the unauthorized operation and reported it to their lieutenant. James was suspended for 2 weeks without pay and given a formal written warning. One more violation and he would be terminated. His wife was furious. His sister would not speak to him. James had risked everything and accomplished nothing. 1 week after his suspension ended, James's cell phone rang at 2 a.m. The number was unlisted. When James answered, Robert Marsh's voice came through the line. Marsh asked James to come to his house alone. He said he wanted to clear the air. James knew it was a trap of some kind, but he also knew this might be his only chance. He notified his partner, wore a wire, and drove to Blackwood Lane. Marsh was sitting on his front porch despite the cold November weather. He gestured for James to sit in the chair beside him. Then he spoke. He told James that he knew what James thought. He knew James believed he was responsible for the missing children, and he wanted James to understand something. James would never prove it. James would never find evidence. James would never get a warrant, because Marsh was smarter. He had been doing this longer than James had been alive. Then Marsh said something that made James's blood freeze. "Those children came to me willingly. They wanted the candy. They wanted to see inside. And once they crossed that threshold, well, they never leave." Marsh smiled. James reached for his recording device to confirm it was capturing this confession. The device was dead. The battery had been full when James arrived, but now it showed no power. Marsh laughed. "Even your technology betrays you on my property," he said. "This house protects me. It always has." James sat in his car outside Marsh's house afterward, gun in his lap, considering his options. He could go back inside and shoot Marsh, claim self-defense. But that would not bring back the children. It would not give the families closure. And if Marsh was telling the truth about the house protecting him, maybe killing Marsh would not even end it. James called the FBI cold case unit and requested a federal review. An agent came, interviewed Marsh, searched public records, and concluded there was insufficient evidence for federal involvement. 1 year after Emma Patterson vanished, James stood on Blackwood Lane on Halloween night. Robert Marsh was on his porch, bowl of full-size candy bars visible through the window, children in costumes streaming past. And at 9:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Emma had disappeared the year before, a call came through. A 6-year-old boy named Daniel Garcia was missing, last seen on Blackwood Lane. James ran to Marsh's house. Marsh was still on his porch, surrounded by witnesses who confirmed he had not moved. Marsh smiled at James, did not say a word, did not have to. That smile said everything. James searched for Daniel all night. He brought in cadaver dogs. He got a warrant based on the new disappearance and tore through Marsh's property for 3 days straight. They found nothing. Robert Marsh died 2 years later. Natural causes, heart attack in his sleep. He was 71 years old. When the estate went to auction, James bought the property with money from his retirement account. He quit the sheriff's department and spent the next 6 months tearing down every wall. He excavated the entire basement. He ripped apart the foundation. He brought in ground-penetrating radar. He dug up the backyard. He demolished the garage. He found nothing, no bodies, no evidence, no trace of 5 missing children. The house was condemned and demolished. The lot sat empty, but James still goes there. Every Halloween night, he stands in the spot where Marsh's porch used to be. And sometimes, late at night when the street is empty, he hears children laughing. Not from any particular direction, from the ground itself. And James knows that 5 children vanished on Blackwood Lane over 33 years. He knows their secret is still buried somewhere, deeper than he could dig, in a place that Robert Marsh took to his grave. And James knows that whatever Marsh did, whatever agreement he made, whatever evil he served, it did not die with him. Because the house may be gone, but every Halloween, children still disappear in this county. Different streets, different circumstances. But always Halloween, always between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Always while a trusted adult was nearby. James keeps a map on his wall. Red pins mark every child who has vanished on Halloween in the county over the past 40 years. The pins form a pattern. They radiate outward from where Marsh's house once stood, like something spreading, like something growing. And James understands now that he never had a chance of stopping it, because whatever collected children on Blackwood Lane is older than Robert Marsh. Marsh was just its servant, just its caretaker, and it is still collecting. John had been hosting the overnight radio slot at WKRX for 7 years. It was not glamorous work. The station was small, independently owned, and the only people listening at 2 a.m. were insomniacs, truck drivers, and security guards trying to stay awake. But John loved it. No corporate interference, no strict playlists, just him and whatever music or conversation he felt like sharing with a handful of listeners scattered across 3 counties. The station itself was a converted house on the edge of town, filled with a mix of analog and digital equipment, some pieces older than John himself. On Halloween nights, John would play horror movie soundtracks, take calls about local legends, and generally have fun with the spooky atmosphere. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 31st, a call came through. John answered with his usual greeting, but the voice quality on the other end was wrong. It sounded like someone talking through water, with layers of static that did not match any interference pattern John had heard before. The caller asked a simple question. "Can you play something for the children?" John asked what song they wanted. The voice responded with something that made no sense. "Listen to the frequency between frequencies." Then the line went dead. John made a joke on air about Halloween bringing out the weirdos and moved on to the next song. But during the commercial break, he noticed something odd. The analog VU meters on his mixing board were moving, showing input activity, despite no source being active. John checked his equipment. No microphone was hot, no line was open. But the meters continued to dance, showing signal coming from somewhere. John began scanning frequencies, trying to locate the source of the interference. He worked methodically through the FM band, listening on his headphones. Between 104.2 and 104.4 MHz, he found something impossible. There was a signal at 104.3, a frequency that should have been empty air. Nothing was licensed to broadcast there in this region. The signal should not exist. John isolated it and listened. Children were singing, not a recording. The audio quality was too raw, too immediate. It was a live transmission. The children sang in unison, maybe a dozen voices, young children between ages 5 and 10. But the song was in a language John did not recognize. Not Spanish or French or German. Something older. The melody was simple but unsettling, with intervals that felt wrong, notes that created dissonance even when the children sang in harmony. John recorded 30 seconds of the signal. He considered playing it on air as a Halloween novelty. Mysterious transmission, spooky children singing in an unknown language, perfect for the night. But before he could cue up the recording, another call came through. This time, a woman's voice, terrified and urgent. She begged him not to play their broadcast. She said if he let them through, they would spread. She told him the children were not children. They were echoes, dead frequencies trying to become real again. She said her brother had played their broadcast on Halloween in 1987. His station burned down that night. 7 people died. The call dropped before John could ask questions. He searched online for radio station fires in 1987 and found an incident report. WLMT in Ohio had burned down on October 31st, 1987. 7 fatalities, including the overnight DJ. The cause was never determined. Witnesses reported hearing screaming from the speakers, even after the building was engulfed in flames. Fire investigators found the transmitter was still broadcasting when they arrived, despite the electrical system having failed. John told himself it was an interesting story, but likely a coincidence. He decided to play just a brief clip of the children's song as a Halloween bit, something to entertain the handful of people still listening at this hour. He queued up the recording, opened his microphone, and made a light comment about mysterious Halloween transmissions. Then he hit play. The 30-second clip aired, and immediately, every phone in the building started ringing. Not just the station lines. John's personal cell phone rang. The production studio phone rang. Even an old disconnected rotary phone in the back office, the one that had not been hooked up to anything in years, started ringing. John answered the station line. Screaming poured through the speaker. He hung up and answered his cell phone. Children laughing, the same laughter from the broadcast. He answered the back office line. Heavy breathing, close to the microphone. In the studio, equipment began malfunctioning. The lights flickered. Analog gear that required physical contact to operate started moving on its own. The turntable in the corner spun up despite being unplugged. Tape decks ejected tapes and loaded them backward. And the broadcast, the children's song, continued playing on a loop despite John having stopped it. The audio fed through all channels simultaneously. The volume increased beyond normal limits, the speakers distorting with the intensity. John tried to regain control. He pulled faders down. The audio continued. He cut power to the mixing board. The audio continued. He ran to the transmitter room and threw the main breaker, killing power to the entire building. For 3 seconds, silence. Then the emergency generator kicked on by itself, though John had not activated it. The broadcast resumed, louder than before. Text messages flooded John's phone. Listeners reported radios in their homes turning on by themselves, all tuned to WKRX. People 2 states away, far beyond the station's normal range, claimed they were receiving the broadcast. Car radios locked to the frequency and would not change stations. One message read, "My daughter woke up speaking words from the song. She does not know that language. She is 4 years old, and she will not stop singing it." A text arrived from an unknown number. It identified the sender as Richard Keller, a retired FCC broadcast engineer. The message explained that what John had played was not a recording. It was a trap. In 1952, an experimental station had broadcast a children's chorus on Halloween night. The next day, every child in the chorus was found dead. No marks on the bodies, no explanation. The station director claimed the children kept singing after death, that the broadcast never actually stopped, that it was searching for a way back. The FCC had buried the report and sealed the frequency. John frantically searched FCC archives on his phone. He found references to Project Resonance, a classified experiment from 1953 involving psychic broadcasting. The project had attempted to record dying children's consciousness during their final moments to study what the researchers called consciousness transmission. The project was terminated when all subjects died simultaneously during the first test. Official reports stated all recordings were destroyed. The studio filled with the sound of footsteps. Small footsteps. Children's footsteps. John was alone in the building, but he heard them clearly. Running in the hallway, skipping in the next room, standing just outside the studio door. Security camera feeds on his monitor showed small figures moving through the station. Child-sized shadows that should not be there. John locked the studio door. The doorknob began to turn from the outside. The broadcast continued across all frequencies, despite John having cut power to every system. He could hear the children's voices coming from equipment that was not even connected. The sound emerged from the walls themselves. And then John heard something that froze him in place. The children were whispering his name. not singing it, whispering it. Dozens of small voices sang John over and over. Monitor screens throughout the studio flickered and displayed faces. Children's faces, but distorted. Eyes too large, taking up half the face. Mouths open too wide, showing too many teeth. The children sang silently on the screens, their lips forming the words of that horrible song. John noticed the hands in the video feeds. The children had too many fingers, 7 on each hand. And the hands were reaching toward the camera, toward John, as if trying to break through the glass. John checked his phone for the time. It showed 2:47 a.m., but that was impossible. He had started his shift at midnight. The mysterious call came in at 2:30. He had only been dealing with this situation for maybe 20 minutes. How could hours have passed? He looked at his watch. It showed 2:47. The studio clock showed 2:47. But John's sense of time told him it had been much longer. He felt like he had been trapped in this room for days. He remembered the original caller's words. Listen to the frequency between frequencies. John realized he needed to broadcast a counter signal. He grabbed his microphone and began speaking directly over the children's transmission. Identified himself. He stated the station's call letters. He declared himself the legitimate operator of this frequency. The broadcast stuttered. The children's voices became angry, rising in pitch and volume. Equipment around the studio began sparking. John continued, adding white noise from a generator to create interference. The broadcast weakened slightly, but did not stop. In desperation, John cut all audio. He let dead air fill the frequency. Silence, the ultimate FCC violation, the one thing a station should never broadcast. For 3 minutes, nothing. Complete silence. Then the children returned, louder than before, and now they were saying more than his name. They were speaking in the voices of people John knew. His mother, his dead father, his ex-wife, all using his name. John made a final decision. He picked up a hammer from the station's toolkit. He destroyed the recording device, smashing it until pieces scattered across the floor. He cut cables with wire cutters. He poured his coffee into the mixing board. Sparks erupted. Smoke filled the studio. The main circuit breaker tripped. The building lost power completely. The emergency generator tried to start, but failed. Absolute silence fell. John stood in the dark studio, breathing hard, waiting. The silence continued. Emergency lights came on, bathing everything in red. The broadcast was gone. The FCC arrived 3 days later to investigate the unauthorized transmission. They found equipment destroyed and burn patterns throughout the studio. John showed them his recording of the original signal. The file played but contained no audio, just silence. Listeners who had called or texted John denied hearing anything unusual. They claimed John was mistaken or having some kind of breakdown. Text message records showed no communications during the time John described. The only evidence was the destroyed equipment and John's testimony. WKRX's owner shut down the station permanently. The broadcasting license was sold to a corporate conglomerate. The building was condemned due to electrical hazards. John could not find radio work after the incident. Station managers heard about what happened and decided he was unstable. His career in broadcasting ended that Halloween night. But the broadcast did not end. 3 years later, John works in IT support. He has not been near a radio station since. But every Halloween night at 2:47 a.m., his devices activate. His phone plays static. Computer speakers hum. The car radio turns on by itself. And through the noise, faint but unmistakable, children singing. The same song, the same language. John records it, but the audio never captures anything. The broadcast exists only for him now. John researched other incidents and found 17 radio stations that experienced similar events on Halloween between 1952 and the present. All closed afterward. All overnight DJs either dead or vanished. John survived. But the frequency between frequencies is always there, waiting. Every year on Halloween, those dead children try to sing their way back into the world. They came closest through John, and he knows that one day, during one Halloween broadcast somewhere, they will succeed. Someone will play their song long enough. And when that happens, the children from Project Resonance will finally return. And John believes with absolute certainty that the world is not ready for what those children have become in the 70 years they have been trapped between frequencies. Michael was in his second year of doctoral studies in American folklore at the State University when his advisors suggested a research angle that would distinguish his dissertation. Contemporary Halloween practices in isolated rural communities. Specifically, towns that maintained pre-commercial traditions, the kind of celebrations that existed before Halloween became a corporate holiday. His advisor mentioned a small town called Samhain Grove, population 400, that allegedly preserved Celtic harvest rituals dating back to the town's founding in 1843. Michael had a master's degree in anthropology and had published papers on folk ritual continuity. He was fluent in Gaelic. His research goal was straightforward: document authentic traditional practices, conduct interviews with residents, and observe the October celebrations firsthand. His dissertation would be the first comprehensive academic study of Samhain Grove's customs. The town was 40 miles from the nearest highway, accessible only by a single-lane road through dense forest. Michael's cell phone lost reception 20 miles out. The GPS stopped working 10 miles from town. He navigated by following hand-painted signs nailed to trees. When he finally arrived, Samhain Grove looked like it existed outside of time. There were no commercial businesses except one general store, no gas station, no restaurants. Houses were spread far apart, connected by dirt roads. The most prominent feature was the town square, where a massive carved pumpkin sat displayed under a glass case. According to a plaque, the pumpkin was preserved from the town's founding in 1843. It should have rotted to nothing in 182 years, but it looked almost fresh. Michael rented a room at the town's only boarding house. The clerk, a woman in her 50s, accepted his payment, but warned him that the town valued privacy. Research was acceptable, but he should not interfere with community practices. She said that outsiders generally left before October, and her tone suggested he should do the same. Michael thanked her and said he specifically wanted to observe October traditions. The woman's expression hardened, but she said nothing more. Over the following days, Michael noticed that everyone in Samhain Grove displayed pumpkin imagery, carved on doors, tattooed on forearms, painted on mailboxes. But these were not jack-o'-lanterns. They were something older, faces with too many teeth, eyes that seemed to follow movement, symbols that looked like corrupted Celtic knots. Michael photographed everything and filled notebooks with observations. The town council met to discuss Michael's presence. He was not invited to the meeting, but afterward, a woman named Linda approached him at the boarding house. She identified herself as the council leader. She told Michael that they had decided to permit him to observe the Festival of Halloween on Halloween night. He could take notes and photographs for his research. But he had to follow 3 rules. First, do not speak during the ceremony. Second, do not leave the designated observer area. Third, destroy all photographs before leaving town. If he violated these rules, there would be consequences. She handed him a written waiver, releasing the town of liability for spiritual consequences. Michael signed without hesitation. He was excited despite the ominous tone. This was exactly the kind of authentic practice he needed for his dissertation. After he signed, the town's residents became friendly. They invited him to dinners. They taught him about their pumpkin cultivation methods. They showed him historical documents about the town's founding. Linda gave Michael access to the town archives, housed in the basement of the meeting hall. The original journals from 1843 described bringing old ways to the new world and establishing Samhain Grove as a place where the barrier thins and the harvest feeds both the living and the other. One entry described a founding sacrifice where 7 children were given to the soil to consecrate the land for proper harvest. Subsequent entries detailed annual rituals, each requiring an offering of innocence on Halloween to keep the bargain with what sleeps beneath. Michael found court records from 1956, when the state investigated Samhain Grove after a neighboring town reported missing children. The investigation ended abruptly. All records were sealed. The state investigator died in a car accident 2 days after leaving town. Michael told himself this was historical, not contemporary. Surely the town was not still practicing human sacrifice. On October 31st, the entire town transformed. Every resident participated in preparations. They hollowed out dozens of massive pumpkins, each weighing over 100 pounds, grown in the communal field at the edge of town. They carved specific symbols into each pumpkin, not faces. Geometric patterns and writing that Michael recognized as pre-Christian Celtic script, though distorted in ways he had never seen. The pumpkins were arranged in concentric circles around the town square. At the center, workers opened the glass case containing the ancient preserved pumpkin. When the case opened, Michael smelled decay, despite the pumpkin appearing intact. Michael noticed 7 children, ages ranging from 6 to 10, dressed in ceremonial robes. Their faces were painted with pumpkin pulp. Linda led them to the center circle. Michael asked about the children. Linda smiled and said they were the chosen ones, a great honor for their families. Michael felt uncomfortable, but could not articulate why. He considered leaving, but his academic curiosity overrode his instinct. After sunset, the entire town gathered around the pumpkin circles. Michael was placed on an elevated platform with his notebook and camera. The town elder, a man whose age was impossible to determine, began chanting in a language that sounded like Gaelic but distorted. The community joined the chant. 7 children were led forward, each positioned inside a hollow pumpkin carved large enough for a child to fit inside. Lids were placed on the pumpkins. The chanting intensified. The pumpkins began to pulse, visibly expanding and contracting like lungs breathing. Michael photographed this, his hands shaking. Vines emerged from the soil and wrapped around the pumpkins. The children inside began screaming. The community continued chanting, showing no reaction to the screams. The elder approached each pumpkin and poured black liquid through the carved mouths. Michael recognized the smell. Blood mixed with something fermented. The vines dragged the pumpkins with the children still inside them, beneath the soil. The ground swallowed them completely. The children's screams became muffled, then silent. The ground stopped moving. The chanting continued for another 30 minutes. Michael tried to leave the platform, violating the second rule. Town members who seemed to appear from nowhere immediately restrained him. The ground where the pumpkins disappeared began moving again. 7 shapes emerged. Pumpkin-like objects covered in soil and pulsing with internal movement. The pumpkins cracked open. 7 figures stepped out. They had the children's body shapes, but their faces were gone, replaced with carved pumpkin features cut directly into their flesh. Eyes, nose, and mouth carved into living tissue that glowed with internal orange light. The town members bowed. The figures walked among the community, touching people's heads. Where they touched, people wept with joy. Linda approached the restrained Michael and whispered an explanation. He was witnessing the hollowing. The 7 children gave their faces so the harvest spirit could walk among them for one night. Tomorrow morning, the children would return to normal. Mostly. The spirit remembers them always and protects the town's crops. Every generation provides 7 volunteers. It is a great privilege. The elder approached Michael's platform. He said that observers become participants when outsiders witness the hollowing. Michael had agreed to spiritual consequences in the waiver. Now he must contribute to the harvest. Town members dragged Michael to the center circle and forced him to his knees before the ancient preserved pumpkin. One of the carved-faced children approached and placed hands on Michael's face. Michael felt intense burning. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The child's touch left carved patterns on Michael's face. Shallow cuts forming a pumpkin's eyes and mouth. Not deep enough to scar permanently, but deep enough to bleed. Town members collected Michael's blood in a bowl and poured it into the ancient pumpkin. The pumpkin's interior glowed briefly. Linda told Michael he was harvest-marked now. He could not speak of what he witnessed. If he tried, the mark would activate and he would feel what the children felt. Complete hollowing. Michael woke in his boarding house bed the next morning. His face was bandaged. He had no memory of returning. He went to the town square in daylight. No evidence of the ritual remained. The pumpkins were gone. The ground was undisturbed. The 7 children played normally in the street, faces intact, laughing. Michael approached them and asked if they remembered the ceremony. The children looked at him blankly and said they had a normal Halloween, trick-or-treating and everything. Michael checked his camera. All photos from the ceremony were corrupted. Images showed only black frames or static. His written notes remained, but were in a language he did not recognize, though he knew he had written them. He packed immediately and drove away. By the time he reached his university, the cuts on his face had healed completely, leaving no physical evidence. Michael tried telling his advisor what happened. The words would not form. Every attempt to describe the ritual caused intense facial pain, burning where he had been marked. He tried writing about it. His hand cramped and refused to complete sentences. He attempted recording audio testimony. His voice distorted and the recorder malfunctioned. He switched dissertation topics and never mentioned Samhain Grove again. Every Halloween since that night, Michael experiences the same thing. At sunset on October 31st, his face burns. The carved pattern reappears on his skin, visible only to him in mirrors, glowing faint orange from within. He hears 7 children singing in that distorted language. He smells pumpkin rot. He tastes blood. The mark fades by November 1st, but it always returns. Michael is 43 now. That night in Samhain Grove happened 17 years ago. He has never returned to that town. He has never successfully spoken about what happened. And sometimes, late on Halloween nights, he wonders how many other researchers carry similar marks. How many people have witnessed the festival of Halloween and been silenced. Michael knows Samhain Grove still performs the ritual every year. He knows 7 children are chosen, and he knows with terrible certainty that some traditions should not be preserved. But traditions do not die when they are fed. They grow, and one day, Samhain Grove's harvest will spread beyond one small town. One day the pumpkins will demand more faces, And when that happens, Michael will feel it in his carved flesh. He will be summoned back. Because once harvest marked, one is never truly free. One is part of the crop, and eventually the harvest claims all it touches. William and Linda had lived in their suburban neighborhood for 8 years. They knew all their neighbors, attended block parties, and their 2 kids played with every other child on the street. Halloween was Linda's favorite holiday, and every year she went all out with decorations, carved multiple pumpkins, and prepared full-size candy bars for trick-or-treaters. Their house was the most popular on the block, with lines of kids waiting on the porch some years. The neighborhood was safe, family-friendly, with no history of crime. Houses sat close together with good street lights illuminating every corner. On October 31st at 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. William answered. A boy stood on the porch, approximately 10 years old, dressed as a skeleton. The costume was realistic, with glow-in-the-dark bones painted on black fabric. The boy carried an orange plastic pumpkin bucket. He did not say trick or treat. He just stood silently, holding out his bucket. William dropped in a candy bar and complimented the costume. The boy did not respond. He turned and walked away. William noticed unusual details about the encounter. The boy had arrived alone. No parent was visible on the street. William had not heard him approach, despite the porch boards creaking under any weight. The boy's face was oddly pale, possibly makeup. When the boy turned away, William noticed the costume was old-fashioned, not the current year's style. The fabric looked aged. Linda asked who was at the door. William described the skeleton boy. Linda checked their neighborhood directory. No children that age lived on their street. The youngest kids were William and Linda's own, ages 7 and 9. The oldest was a teenager. There was no 10-year-old boy in the neighborhood. At 7:15 p.m., the doorbell rang again. William answered. The same skeleton boy stood there, holding out his bucket. William was confused. He asked if the boy had already come by. The boy did not respond. William gave him another candy bar. The boy walked away. At 7:58 p.m., the doorbell rang again. The same boy. Same silent request. William asked where his parents were. The boy stared without speaking. William gave him candy and watched as the boy walked into the darkness between streetlights and seemed to vanish. At 8:33 p.m., the boy returned. William refused to answer the door this time. He watched through the window. The boy stood on the porch for a full 5 minutes, motionless, then walked away. Linda thought William was playing a prank. She said she would answer the door next time. At 9:07 p.m., the doorbell rang. Linda opened the door. The same skeleton boy stood there. Linda gave him candy and asked how many times he had come by. The boy spoke for the first time, his voice flat and distant. He said he was still trick-or-treating and had to finish his route. Linda asked where he lived. The boy pointed at William and Linda's house. He said he lived here. William and Linda conferred inside. The boy claimed their house was his home. They checked the property's history. They had purchased it 8 years ago from an elderly couple who had lived there for 43 years. The house was built in 1967. William called the previous owners, now in assisted living, and asked if they knew about a boy or if a child had died on the property. The previous owners said there had been no deaths in the house during their time. But the people before them, there had been a tragedy in the 1970s. The owner did not know the full story. Linda searched county death records. She found an entry. David Hatcher, age 10, died October 31st, 1978. The address matched their house. Cause of death was listed as hit by car while trick-or-treating. He died at the scene, 1 block from home. A local news archive included a photo. The boy in the picture matched the description of their skeleton costume visitor. At 9:45 p.m., the doorbell rang continuously. 15 times in 2 minutes. William opened the door. The skeleton boy stood there with his bucket extended, but his face was fully visible now through the makeup. The skin was translucent, eyes sunken deep. There was a see-through quality to his entire figure. William slammed the door. The boy did not leave. William watched through the peephole. The boy stood motionless, facing the door. Minutes passed. The boy did not move. Linda called the police non-emergency line. She explained a child was harassing them, leaving out the ghost details. The dispatcher said an officer would come by. The officer arrived at 10:15 p.m. William and Linda explained that a boy was standing outside. The officer checked. No one was there. He searched the yard and found nothing. The officer left. The moment his patrol car rounded the corner, the doorbell rang. The boy had returned. Linda's son came downstairs and said there was a boy looking in his window. William went to the room and looked out. The skeleton boy stood in the backyard, staring up at the house. William yelled for him to leave. The boy did not move. William ran outside to confront him. The backyard was empty. William returned inside. The doorbell rang. The boy was at the front door again. Linda's daughter said she had seen the boy earlier in the evening. She thought he was a neighborhood kid and had invited him inside before Linda noticed. The boy had stood in the foyer for a long time, looking around like he was remembering something. When Linda asked him to leave, the boy said this was his house and Linda was in his room. Based on the house layout from 1978, Linda's daughter's bedroom would have been where David Hatcher's room once was. Linda sat on the porch and addressed the boy directly the next time the doorbell rang. She called him by name, David. She told him she knew who he was and what happened to him, but he could not stay. This was not his house anymore. The boy stopped holding out his bucket. He spoke clearly for the first time. He said he did not finish trick-or-treating. He was coming home to show his parents his candy when the car hit him right there. He pointed at the street, but he got back up. He had to show his parents his candy, had to finish Halloween. They were waiting for him. Linda gently explained that his parents were gone. Many years had passed. He was not alive. The boy became agitated. He insisted he was trick-or-treating. He had candy. He shook his bucket, and Linda heard something rattling inside. She glimpsed old wrappers from 1970s brands, disintegrated chocolate pieces. William realized what was happening. The boy did not know he was dead. He had been repeating his Halloween route for 46 years. He could not move on until he completed the ritual of showing his parents his candy. William told Linda his idea. They could act as surrogate parents, complete the ritual, give the boy closure. William initially resisted his own suggestion, but Linda agreed after seeing the anguish in the boy's eyes. They invited the boy inside. David entered hesitantly. He looked around, confused. The house was different. Linda told him they were proud of him and asked him to show them his candy. David emptied his bucket on the coffee table. Ancient, decomposed candy spilled out. Wrappers from brands that had been extinct for decades. Some were so old the logos were barely visible. William and Linda praised his haul. They asked about his night. David described his trick-or-treating route from 46 years ago. He named houses and neighbors long gone. He talked about friends who would now be in their 50s if they were still alive. As David talked, he became more transparent. His voice faded. The edges of his form blurred, Linda said he had done such a good job trick-or-treating, and it was time for him to go to bed now. David nodded. He asked if he could have a Snickers bar first. Linda gave him candy from her bowl. David took it and smiled for the first time. A genuine child's smile, free of sadness. He said thank you and that he loved her. He walked toward the stairs. His form faded with each step. Before he reached the top, he was gone completely. On the coffee table where David had emptied his bucket, a pile of candy wrappers remained. Mars bars from 1970s packaging. Bonkers candy discontinued in the 1990s. Wacky wafers, all aged and decayed. William photographed them. He touched one. The wrapper crumbled to dust. By morning, all the wrappers had disintegrated into fine powder. William contacted the local historical society and asked about David Hatcher. They confirmed the incident. David had been trick-or-treating with friends on Halloween 1978. He ran ahead of the group, excited to get home and show his parents his candy. A car struck him 1 block from his house. The driver never saw him in his dark costume. David died on the street while his friends screamed for help. His parents arrived moments after. They never recovered from the loss. They moved away within a year. The house was sold to another family. David's parents both died in the early 2000s. They were buried together in the town cemetery. William and Linda visited David's grave. The headstone was small and weathered. The inscription read, "David Hatcher, beloved son, 1968-1978. May his joy be eternal." They left a full-size Snickers bar on the grave. When they returned a week later, the candy bar was gone. Not taken by animals, simply gone, as if someone had accepted the gift. William and Linda have lived in their house for 5 more years since that Halloween. David has never returned. The doorbell does not ring unexpectedly. There are no faces in windows, no footsteps in empty rooms. But every Halloween, Linda leaves a full-size Snickers bar on the porch before bringing in the candy bowl for the night. And every Halloween morning, the Snickers bar is gone. They tell themselves animals take it, but they know better. David stops by once a year on his eternal trick-or-treating route to visit the people who gave him peace, to visit the surrogate parents who told him it was okay to stop searching, to visit the house that was once his home and finally let him rest. Mary had been a licensed clinical psychologist for 19 years, specializing in trauma and grief counseling. Her practice was in a quiet office building in a mid-sized city, and she maintained a reputation for helping clients work through the most difficult experiences of their lives. She was methodical, evidence-based, and deeply skeptical of anything that could not be explained through psychology or neuroscience. She did not believe in the supernatural. She believed in the power of the human mind to create narratives that explain traumatic experiences. And she was good at helping people separate reality from the stories their trauma had created. On October 29th, a new client named James called her office requesting an emergency appointment. He said he had been referred by another therapist who could no longer help him. Mary's receptionist checked the schedule. Mary had one opening on October 31st at 7 p.m., her last appointment of the day. James said he would take it. His voice sounded strained, desperate. The receptionist noted that he specifically asked if Mary would be willing to stay late, past sunset. Mary confirmed she would stay as long as necessary. She had handled crisis interventions before. This would be no different. James arrived exactly at 7 p.m. on Halloween night. He was in his early 40s, well-dressed but disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he had not slept in days. He sat down in Mary's office and immediately asked if she believed in curses. Mary gave her standard response. She believed in psychological phenomena that people sometimes interpreted as curses. Intrusive thoughts, anxiety, trauma responses, obsessive-compulsive patterns. All of these could feel like being cursed, but were actually treatable conditions. James nodded as if he had expected that answer. Then he told his story. 3 years ago, he had attended a Halloween party at a friend's estate. The friend was wealthy and eccentric, interested in occult history. The party had a theme: authentic Victorian spiritualism. The house was decorated with period-appropriate items: seance tables, spirit boards, mourning photography, post-mortem daguerreotypes. Among the decorations was an antique mirror, approximately 4 feet tall, framed in black wood with carved symbols. James said the host explained the mirror's history during the party. It had belonged to a Victorian-era medium named Eleanor Vance, who claimed she could communicate with the dead through reflections. According to the story, Eleanor would have clients look into the mirror on All Hallows' Eve, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and the mirror would show them their deceased loved ones. But something went wrong during a seance in 1891. A client looked into the mirror and saw something that was not their loved one, something that had been waiting on the other side. The client went mad and died within a week. Eleanor Vance sealed the mirror and warned that it should never be used on Halloween night again. James told Mary that he had been drunk at the party. He thought the story was entertaining fiction. Around midnight, on a dare, he stood in front of the mirror. He looked at his reflection. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then his reflection smiled at him. He had not smiled. His reflection had smiled independently. Mary interrupted and offered a rational explanation. Alcohol impairs perception and judgment. The mirror was old, possibly warped, which could distort reflections. The lighting at a party creates shadows and movement that the brain interprets as meaningful. James was experiencing a false memory enhanced by suggestion and anxiety. This was textbook psychology. James continued as if Mary had not spoken. After that night, things changed. He started seeing his reflection behave differently than his actual movements. Small things at first. A delay of half a second. A slight difference in facial expression. Then more obvious discrepancies. His reflection would move when he stood still. Would face different directions. Would appear in mirrors even when James was not standing in front of them. Mary took notes and suggested a neurological evaluation. Visual hallucinations could indicate various conditions: migraines, seizures, even brain tumors. James needed medical testing, not therapy. James said he had been tested. MRI, CT scan, full neurological workup. Everything came back normal. 6 different doctors found nothing wrong. The incidents escalated, James explained. His reflection started appearing in other reflective surfaces. Windows, car mirrors, phone screens, even puddles of water. And the reflection was changing. It looked like him, but different. Thinner, paler. The eyes were wrong, darker, with a predatory quality. The smile was too wide. And worst of all, the reflection was trying to communicate. It would mouth words, would press its hands against the glass from the inside as if trying to break through. Mary suggested this was a manifestation of dissociation, possibly depersonalization disorder. The feeling that one's reflection is separate from oneself is a documented psychological phenomenon. James was not experiencing anything supernatural. He was experiencing a treatable mental health condition. James reached into his bag and pulled out his phone. He opened the camera app and set it to selfie mode. He held the phone so both he and Mary could see the screen. James's face appeared in the camera view. Normal. Then James turned the phone slightly angling it to show his reflection in the office window behind him. In the window's reflection, James's face was different. The expression was wrong. The eyes were too dark. And as Mary watched, the reflection smiled while James's actual face remained neutral. Mary felt a chill but maintained her professional composure. She suggested it was a trick of light, a camera artifact, a problem with the phone's lens. James turned the phone back to normal selfie mode. His face looked normal again. He switched back to showing the window reflection. The wrong face returned. Mary asked to see the phone. James handed it to her. She examined it. The device was functioning normally. No cracks in the lens. No obvious explanation. Mary suggested they conduct an experiment. She stood next to James and looked at the window reflection. In the reflection, she saw herself normally. But James's reflection beside her had that wrong expression, that too wide smile, those dark eyes. Mary looked directly at James. His actual face was neutral, concerned, normal. She looked back at the reflection. Still wrong. She closed her eyes, counted to 5, opened them. The reflection had not changed. Mary felt her skepticism cracking, but clung to rationality. There had to be an explanation. Some property of the window glass, some optical illusion they were both perceiving. She suggested they move to a different room. They went to her waiting area. James stood in front of a large mirror on the wall. Mary stood beside him. In the mirror, Mary's reflection was normal. James's reflection had its hand raised in a wave. James's actual hand was at his side. Mary asked James to raise his hand. James raised his hand. In the mirror, the reflection lowered its hand. They were moving in opposite directions. Mary reached out and touched the mirror. The surface was cool, solid glass. She looked at her own reflection. Normal. She looked at James's reflection. It was staring directly at her now, ignoring the actual James. The reflection's eyes locked onto Mary's eyes, and it mouthed a word. Soon. Mary stepped back from the mirror. Her heart was racing. She had no explanation. She had witnessed something that should not be possible. James asked if she believed him now. Mary said she needed to think. She needed to research. She asked James to leave and return for another appointment. James said there was no point. He had seen that look before on the faces of the other therapists. The look that said they had seen something they could not explain and wanted nothing to do with him. James told Mary the final part of his story. The reflection was getting stronger. It could hold its independence for longer periods. And 3 days ago, on October 28th, James woke up unable to move. He was paralyzed in bed, but he could see. And in the bedroom mirror across from his bed, his reflection was moving freely. It got out of the bed in the reflection. It walked around the reflected room. It stared at James's paralyzed body and laughed silently. After 10 minutes, James could move again. The reflection was back to normal. James said he knew what was happening. The thing in the mirror was getting ready to switch places. On Halloween night, when the veil is thinnest, it would complete the exchange. James would be trapped in the mirror world, and the reflection would take his place in reality. He had come to Mary hoping a therapist could help, but he realized now that no one could stop what was coming. He was telling Mary as a warning, do not look in mirrors on Halloween night. Do not let your reflection catch you unaware. James stood to leave. Mary asked what he would do. James said he had one option left. If he destroyed every reflective surface in his home, covered every window, avoided every mirror, he might survive the night. he was going home to seal himself in a room with no reflections. No glass, no metal, no water, no screens. He would sit in darkness until November 1st. And he would pray that the thing in the mirror could not reach him without a surface to cross through. Mary tried to convince James to stay. She could call a colleague, arrange a psychiatric evaluation, get him help. James said there was no help. He had consulted priests, paranormal investigators, occult experts, everyone he could find. They all said the same thing. Once the mirror claims you, there is no escape. The only chance is to deny it access on Halloween night. James left. Mary sat in her office, shaking. She looked at her reflection in the window. Normal. She looked away and took deep breaths. She told herself there was a rational explanation she had not yet discovered. She would research optical illusions, perceptual disorders, shared hallucinations. There had to be science that explained this. Mary stayed late in her office, researching. She lost track of time. When she finally checked her phone, it was 11:47 p.m. Still October 31st, 13 minutes until midnight. She gathered her things and prepared to leave. As she reached for her coat, she caught sight of her reflection in the office window. Her reflection was putting on a coat. But Mary had not touched her coat yet. Her hand was still extended toward it. In the reflection, her hand was already holding it. Mary froze. She watched her reflection finish putting on the coat, pick up the briefcase, and walk toward the door. Mary had not moved. Her reflection reached the door in the mirror. It turned and looked directly at Mary. It smiled. Then it stepped through the door in the reflection and disappeared. Mary could not move. She stood paralyzed, staring at the window. In the reflection, the office was empty. She was not there. She looked down at her physical body, still present. She looked back at the window. No reflection. She was casting no reflection. Mary's phone buzzed. Midnight, November 1st. Halloween was over. Mary raised her hand. In the window, nothing. No reflection raised its hand back. Mary understood then what James had been trying to warn her about. By witnessing his curse, by seeing his reflection's independence, she had attracted its attention. And now something in the mirror world knew she existed. Something that had taken her reflection. Something that would be waiting the next time she looked in a mirror, ready to complete what it had started. Mary has not looked in a mirror since that night. She avoids all reflective surfaces. She had the mirrors in her home removed. She keeps her phone screen off. She does not go near windows after dark. But sometimes, in the peripheral vision, she sees movement in a turned-off computer screen, in a darkened window, in the chrome of a passing car. And she knows her reflection is still out there, living her life in the mirror world, growing stronger, waiting for the next Halloween when the veil will thin again and the exchange can be completed.